This is our second video on the basic elements of Java. I was talking about strings and looking at strings. So we said anything between our quotes is going to be a string. And there's actually a class that calls string, and we're not going to be actually using that class in this particular chapter, but we do want to talk about some of the things of how the compiler looks at the string. So if you look at this string right here called hello everyone with a space, we would say that this, if we wanted to know how many characters are in this string, which is really useful many times, because for example, like passwords always have to be a certain number of characters. We have to know how many characters it is that a user has entered. It would count all the letters, and it would also count the spaces. Now, when this is saved to memory, it's saved to something that's called an array. And we'll look at arrays later. You may or may not know about arrays yet, but the position of each character has a position in the array. And so the position of H would be 0. So it starts counting at 0 and not 1. And there's a whole reason for this, which I'll definitely go into when we talk about arrays, and it has to do with math. But it helps the program find where these strings are. So this string is actually placed in memory temporarily, and then as soon as the program closes, then that memory location goes away. But it does have a space. It has a place in memory for the string. So we talked about the plus sign, which is to join more than one string together. We can join strings with integers. We can join strings with different equations. Now the other thing that we can do is, this is a variable, but we can also define something called constant. So variables means it's something that you can change within the program. So I can ask the user to enter a new number, and I could then assign it to num1 and change that value. But let's say that I have something that I don't want it to ever change in my program. That would be a constant, and we would start with the keyword final, give it a data type. So let's say that it's, I'm going to give it the data type double, or float, which allows for floating point numbers. And I'm going to give it a name. Now constants, again, we want to follow a certain format for naming things. So it's a naming convention, and the naming convention, not required, but it's a convention that we use in all programming, is that we capitalize our constants. The reason we capitalize them is so that it's very easy for a programmer to see as they're editing a program, looking at somebody else's code, to see this is a variable versus this is a constant. You don't have to go back and see where it was defined. You see it's capital, you're like, okay, this probably was defined as a constant because it's capital. So let's say that I want to define the tax rate. So I'm going to use underscore rate, tax rate equals 0.0825, which is the tax rate for Dallas. And so there it is. There's my constant. What that means is that if I try to assign a new value to this, it's going to give me an error. So if anywhere I try to say tax rate equals, and I try to change it 0.08, then it's going to give me an error, and it's going to tell me that tax rate cannot be assigned. It must be blank. It must be, go back. It must, and not using a compound assignment. Okay, so it just basically cannot be assigned a value. You can never assign a value to it. because it's final and it will not change. Okay. The other thing I wanted to show you, which I didn't in a previous video, is when we're, as far as naming conventions for variables, I was saying that we start with a lowercase letter, and if you have two words for a variable, then your second word would be a capital letter. So let's say that you call it final grade equals 0. Semicolon. So final start with a lowercase letter, second word start with capital. Again, it's just a naming convention, but I do want you to follow this naming convention because it's something that we use for many of the object-oriented programming languages. Now, when you decide the data type of your variable or your constant, know that at this point what's happening is when this runs, the compiler goes to the computer's memory and it grabs 4 bytes that are available, 4 bytes of memory that are available. And it has a name, that it assigns those 4 bytes, and it grabs the memory location of those 4 bytes, and it stores the 100 in that memory location. So anytime that you're using a data type, know that you're grabbing that many bytes for that data type and in the memory location, so you're grabbing that much memory. And a double, let's see, looking back at your book to see how many bytes is a double. Maybe it's 8 or 16. Okay, so long as 8, maybe a double 16. I don't have it in front of me, but it grabs that many bytes and then it stores the number. Whether it needs all that memory to store the one number or not, it will grab that much memory. So just be aware of that and make sure you use the right data type of what you're needing. So for here, since this is a whole number, I wouldn't use a float or a double here or long, because it's not a floating point number and it's just going to take more memory when I run my program. Something else that you'll see in your book is putting values into the variable. So I can put a value here when I define my variable, or I can assign it to 0, which means I'm initializing my variable to 0, and then maybe later on I calculate that grade. So I say something like final grade equals, and I have all these variables that hold my, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. Right now I'm just going to use numbers, plus 90, plus 80. So this is the students' grades. And I'm going to add all those up and divide them by 3 and get their average. Because I'm dividing and this is an average, I'm going to change this to a double, or it could be a float. So I want to be able to see if it's 86.3, 86.5. I want to be able to see that. So let's run this, and well, first of all, we need to output the final grade. So let's go ahead and output the final grade here. Final grade. And I'm just going to delete all this here and run. Okay, so it says errors exist in required projects. A simple project, proceed with launch. Well, no, there's an error, so let me not proceed. So I press cancel. So looking at this, I already see that there's a parentheses that's missing here. But let's see what it tells me. Yeah, and it says there's a parenthesis missing, so always look for your parentheses, look for your semicolons, that kind of thing. It's typically the problems that you'll run into. Another problem you'll run into is if you name this final grade, but then you misspell it here, misspelling it, it doesn't know what you mean. So it has to be spelled exactly how you named it here, okay? So this person's average is 90.0. Let's change this to 85. And now it's 91. So it looks like it is rounding. Let's see, I'm just gonna type this into, so I have 193 plus 85. And if I divide that by 3, I should get 92.66. So actually it's not rounding, it's dropping off. It's just giving me 92 and not 92.66. So the reason it's doing that is because I have not, like if I had a variable here and the variable was double. So let's say that I take this, let me just show you. It's better if I show you than I tell you. And I'm gonna say double grade average grade equals, and then I put ABG grade. Okay, so now I run it. Oh, let's see, what did I do here? Oh, semicolon. Forgot my semicolon there at the end. Run. Still doing it. Okay. So anytime that I have something like this where it's calculating it, I have to tell the program that I want this to show me the floating point numbers. And the way you do that is by doing something called typecasting. And with typecasting, what you do is you put the data type in front here. So in parentheses, I'm going to put double. And then now when I run it, it should show me my, there it is, my 0.66667. And it will also work if I do it like I had it earlier. So if I delete it and I just put it here, run it. So I have to typecast it and tell it when I divide, I want you to show me the numbers after the decimal. Otherwise, it's not going to, I have to be very explicit and tell it that. We talked about putting data into variables, many different ways that we can put data into variables. You can look at your book for other examples. Again, if you're going to ask the user for input, which is our next task that we're going to talk about, getting input from the user, then you don't have to assign it any values. So let's say that you were going to get a number from the user, then and want to output that number here, then I'm just going to initialize the number to 0. Always, I want to initialize all my variables to 0 if I'm going to get input from the user. It's always something that you want to do. And the reason you want to do that is because when the compiler grabs memory from your computer's memory, okay, it grabs a certain amount of memory, that memory location has junk data in it, and it grabs that junk data. And you could possibly use the junk, inadvertently, you can use that junk data in your calculations, and you won't know what is going on. You'd be like, where's that number coming from? Just initialize everything to 0 to make sure that doesn't happen. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to read, have a read statement or input statement. And we can either read from the keyboard or we can read from a file. We're going to use a class called the scanner class. And the scanner class is going to allow us to read in from either one of those places, either the keyboard or a file. We're just going to talk about reading from the keyboard right now. So the first thing that I have to do is I have to create the class. And to do that, I'm going to say scanner console, or not create the class. The class is created. I have to create a, just like we create variables of data types, I'm creating or instantiating this class. So my class is called scanner. We're going to first create an input stream object. So this is called an object right here. Console. Console is the object of the class scanner. And I'm going to associate this object with my input device. And my input device is going to be the keyboard. So I'm going to say scanner console equals, so I'm going to associate it with new scanner system.in. Okay, so I've just created an object console, and what this statement here does is it creates the input stream object console. It's going to associate it with the standard input device, and now I'm going to be able to read from the keyboard. And so let's say that I want to read an integer and put it into this variable. So I've created my variable, and then I'm going to say console dot next integer, because I'm reading an integer. And if it was a double, it would be next double. So next double will just retrieve a floating point number. If I just did console.next and I don't say next int or next double, then it would just get a string. And it would get a string until I believe, yeah, it gets a string until a space, until it reaches a space. If I want to get a whole line with spaces, then I need to use console.nextLine. So we'll just use this one. Next int and then num1. Let's see, new scanner system.in. Let's see what is missing. Oh yeah, so I want to put this statement out here, and then we'll talk about what static means, but for now we're going to put static. And let's see, what am I missing? Yeah, so here, input Java. So this one, it added it all by itself, which is good. I didn't talk about that. So you have to import this library, which actually defines the class scanner. And it did that for us. And should run, but it's not running. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's take this off. And let's see if it runs. Okay, so it's got to be our, something doesn't look like our scanner. Console equals new scanner. Oh, I see. Hold on. Right here. So what we want to do, I forgot to do num1 equals. So I grab the integer and I have to assign it to num1. Okay, let's just see if that's the problem. No. System.out print line enter a number. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I'm not sure why it didn't show me the output. So it was trying to get the integer, but it wasn't showing this window. It was... All right, so here we have an output statement. It says enter a number. So I'm going to enter number 7. And it says hello everyone 7. So whatever number I enter, 100, it prints out, it grabs the number with the next int method. That's part of the console object, which is console is an object from the scanner class. Okay. And so let's take a look at some other things that we can grab. So if we want to get a double instead of an integer, we put double here. Just delete next. Oh wait, I have too many parentheses. So it's good that you get to see these errors, because they'll be the same errors that you'll make as you type things. So there we grabbed a double. And of course, even if you say grab a double, they could enter a non-floating point number, and that's okay. Just shows it as a floating point. So if you are not sure if the user will enter a floating point number or a non-floating point number, just make it floating point, make it a double, and then you'll be safe. And then my other option is if I just want to grab a string. And so that one we'll do later, but we also have next for string and next line, which we won't do that one for now. Okay, so we grabbed input. There are a lot of different small examples in your program. I've included all the examples that are in your book under assignment 0. So if you're really new at this, I would look at those examples, I would run them, I would type them, and really, this is a super important chapter if you are new to C++ or Java. C++ is just very similar to this. Something else that it shows you is some ways that we can increment and decrement our numbers. So for example, for num1, if I grab num1, then I want to decrease that number. I can say num1 plus plus, and that would add 1 to the number. So if I enter 100, my number goes up to 101. So num1 plus plus is the same thing as saying num1 equals num1 plus 1. That's the same thing, it's just a shortcut. Same thing if you say num1 minus minus, it will decrease by 1. So I do 100 and it gives me 99 because I commented this out, which means it's not gonna compile, and I mean it's not gonna run or execute, right? So the compiler doesn't look at it, it skips any lines that are comments. And so it subtracts 1 from 100 and shows me 99 there. Okay, let me just set my phone there to do not disturb. And we can also we looked at all the different ways that we can show our output. So there's a section in your chapter that talks about different escape sequences that you can put in your string. And one of those that can be useful is tab. So let's say that I want to tab, instead of putting a space between this string and this variable, inside I would, let me just double check. It's been a while since I've used the tab, how to use it. \t. Okay, so backslash, I think, no, that's not gonna work. Let's see. Sequence is backslash n. Okay, well, let's try it, backslash in here. See if it works. Backslash t. Oh, I have to enter a number. Yeah, it did work. Okay, so backslash t, I can just put it, it doesn't print the backslash and the t, it just gives you a tab. And it looks like tab is really not that many spaces. Looks like it's 2 spaces, maybe 3. There's also backslash n, which is new line. So that prints hello everyone, brings you back to this line, and prints 99.0 under there. There's a \B for backspace, \R for return. So the difference between \N for new line and \R for return is N. It moves to the very beginning of the next line, and \R moves to the beginning of the current line, not the next line. And then if you want to print a backslash, you got to have 2 backslashes. So let's say that you want to print a backslash right there. You got to have 2 backslashes. Otherwise, the computer gets confused, the compiler, and it thinks that you forgot your N or your T or your R. So this here will print 2 backslashes. I mean, not 2 one backslash. And then if you want to print a single quote or a double quote, again, it gets very confused, doesn't know what you're talking about if you put just a single quote right there. But if you want to print a quote, just put a backslash and then a quote, and then this other quote is to end this string. And so now when you run it, it will print a quote in your string. So that quote is actually part of the string right there. You can do the same thing for a single quote, or really it's an apostrophe, like that apostrophe. You can then run and show that apostrophe before the 99. Okay, so you need those backslashes. So here earlier when we saw this right here, import java.util.scanner, this utility to be able to use the scanner class. So basically I'm trying to see exactly how much it goes into here, into this section. So import is just a reserved word, and it imports a specific class from a package. And so that statement that we see here, right here, imports the class scanner. So here's the class scanner from the package java.util. And this import statement, it will automatically do it for you if you try to use the class, like the class scanner, or you can type it in yourself there. The other thing that we can do is, instead of doing scanner, you can put an asterisk right here. And then what would happen is, if you change scanner to an asterisk, it would input all the classes under the java.util package. Now, that's perfectly fine, right? It saves you time with typing, but the thing is that anytime that you import something into your program, it just makes your program bigger because you're adding more code. So here, I mean, you only need scanner, so why import every single class that util this package has? So just something to be aware, because you might see that some people do that, and I think it's just better to include exactly what you're using. Okay, well, that's the very end of talking about the basic elements of Java. And again, it's just really important that you are super familiar with all of these rules and how to get input and define your variables and define your constants, getting input from the keyboard, figuring out how to output. Just get very familiar with all of that syntax. and before you continue on.